change in time. We just want to let everyone know this is the one that's at 9 a.m. and the rest will still be at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So just reminding everyone that this session will be recorded. If people are needing session 1 to 8, let me know. We have those on our YouTube links. If you could mute your mic, myself and Corey will be monitoring the chat, and there's lots of opportunities at the end to ask questions. So before we get started too, I just want to make sure, okay, we've got everything set up. Okay. So on behalf of Community Living Algoma, I'd like to welcome our employees, and I'd also like to welcome several guests, and I hope I don't miss anyone. If I do, I apologize. So we have Kenora Association for Community Living, Community Living Brant, Live, Work, Play, Community Living Atikokan, Community Living Fort Francis, Community Living Chatham-Kent, Community Living Sudbury, Empower Simcoe, Community Living Guelph Wellington, Community Living Espanola, Community Living Sarnia, Community Living Parry Sound, Community Living Welland Pelham, Community Living Brockville, Inclusion Saskatchewan, Community Living Oakville, Community Living Walkerton, Community Living Huntsville, Community Living Owen Sound, and council members from Hornpain. So today I have the privilege to introduce Al Condeluci. We've been working with Al since Community Living Central Huron. Thank you. I apologize for missing you. We've been working with Al since 2015, on and off, working on connecting people to the community, building on social capital. And most recently, since 2020, we've been working on a community engagement project. And the micro piece is the sessions that you've been attending. Today is session 9 on change, challenge, and opportunity. So Dr. Al Condeluci has been a leader in community building, human services, and inclusive advocacy work for the past 50 years. Holding a Ph.D. and MSW from the University of Pittsburgh, Dr. Condeluci has been the CEO of CLASS, Community Living and Support Services, a major nonprofit community building organization in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania from 1973 to 2019. He holds faculty status at the University of Pittsburgh in the Schools of Social Work and Health, Rehab Sciences, and is the author of 7 books, including the acclaimed Interdependence, The Route to Community 1995, and more recently, Social Capital, The Key to Macro Change 2014. In 2018, he received the key to the City of Pittsburgh, the highest civilian honor that can be given to a community member. He serves as a consultant advisor and human service coach and is on a number of nonprofit boards and government commissions of state, local, and national levels. He helped found and convenes the Interdependence Network, an international coalition of professionals, family members, and consumers interested in community engagement and macro change. And his contact information is at the end of his PowerPoint. So please welcome Al.
Tanya, thanks so much. Appreciate the adjustments that everybody made for our program today, moving it up to 9 o'clock. And I know this is right on the heel of a holiday weekend, and so for a lot of folks, it really was an adjustment. I appreciate that. In fact, wanted to not only wish everyone a belated happy Thanksgiving, but to share with you that some of the reasons for the adjustment that we made today. One of my new endeavors since I've retired from the administrative responsibility of managing an organization, has been to really see where and how I might be able to help out in my own community. And one of the things that we launched a couple of years ago was a friend and I started a music group. This is a fellow that I used to play music with when we were in high school and college, and then after we graduated, sort of went our own ways. And he actually made a career in music, both on the academic side as well as through the United States Navy music program. And long story short, after he retired from his role as the dean of the School of Performing Arts at Rowan University in New Jersey, he came back to Pittsburgh. I mean, and we've stayed in touch over all these many years. But he came back and he brought a bass guitar to me, which is what I used to play in the group we had back in high school and college. And he said, "We're getting the band back together." And I said, "I haven't touched the bass, since our college days." And he said, "Nah, it's just like riding a bike. It comes right back." So with his persistence, we formed a group actually called the Doo-Wop Doctors, and because he has his doctorate in music and my doctorate is in psychology, and so we figured it was a kind of a cool name. Well, anyway, long story short, we've started to play music, and one of the things that we want to do in terms of giving back is we hold fundraisers for nonprofit organizations where we put together, an oldies set of music, invite folks in, have a small cover charge, and then whatever we raise goes to the organization we support. And so in 2019, before the pandemic, we actually raised over $11,000 for 3 nonprofit groups that year. Of course, during 2020, everything went dark. We just emerged now, and we re-emerged, I should say, from the pandemic, and we had our first 2 fundraisers with we've raised now $6,000 this year through 2 events. But this afternoon we're actually playing for another organization, and I've got to be there to set up. It's going to be an afternoon gig, so I asked Tanya if we might be able to adjust upward a little bit to give me a little bit of time on the tail end to get to this agency and get our stuff all set up and ready to go. So I appreciate your adjusting with me. Thanks so much, and it's great to have everyone together, all the organizations that have been a part of this series and following along with some of the things that we've been looking at and examining, both in a construct kind of a way, but hopefully in terms of generating strategies that can be utilized, by your organization in terms of the kinds of changes you want to make, and that's really our topic for today: change, challenge, and opportunity in relationship to getting to the outcomes that we want. Now, most of the people on the call today and who have been involved in the series represent organizations that support people with disabilities. And many of those people have intellectual disabilities, but there's also other disabilities that are being supported through the organizations. And one of the realities that I think every one of us know is that although we have some nice programs that we make available to people, that the folks that we support are really not truly included in the community and truly a natural part of the mix. And I mean, we do nice things, and I know that, and I know you really work hard to make sure that the folks that you support have opportunities. But when you back away from all of it and you really look at our communities and our culture, folks with disabilities are still separated, segregated, and disconnected. Stereotyped assumptions are made by the greater community. And in fact, one of the big assumptions that's made is that our job as organizations is to be caretakers for those folks. And in working with John Policiccio and Tanya and all the good folks at Algoma, one of the realities that we uncovered recently was bore out in some interviews we did with community members to get a sense of what they think about not just our organizations, but our mission and what we all are intending to do. And that those interviews kind of revealed that the community really just thinks that we're caretakers, and they actually referred to the men and women that we support as those are CLA people. They're community living Algoma people, and that basic mentality is that folks with disabilities need caretaking, and organizations like ours have sprouted up to do that, and that's our jobs, right? That's our role, and that reality is still so prevalent in our cultures, and so as we, at Algoma, as we began to really get honest with that appraisal and really begin to say, have we really been creating meaningful opportunities for people to engage, and what more might we be able to do, really led us to roll up our sleeves and really do some changing to the way we provide supports. And that gets to our topic today, not specifically what we're going to be doing, and I'll talk a little bit about some of that as we go through the concepts here, but is to really understand, what does change mean, and how come it's so elusive, and how can we get better at getting connecting the dots to really promote meaningful engagement for men, women, and children who happen to have disabilities in our own communities. And so what I wanted to do is really kind of tug away at this construct of change. I want us to think a little bit about it, and then really begin to look at how might the applications unfold. And so this notion of change is really an intriguing one. It's an elusive one, because human beings are essentially creatures of habit. And one of the things about the way we sort of engage with the world is that we're more comfortable in our routines. That once we get a routine established, it gets set in cement, right? And I mean, stop and think about your typical daily routine right now, right? You probably get up around the same time every day, and you probably, go through these motions, right? You get the kids ready for their day, you get yourself ready, you time it so that when you get into the car, you know exactly, how long it's going to take to get to your office site. Once you get there, you pretty much go through the same routine. You go get your coffee filled. You chat at the water cooler about, I don't know, The Bachelor, or whatever we talk about at the water cooler, and you pretty much go through these routines that you've established. They become hardened, right? Now, that's how we are. We're much more comfortable when we have predictability, when we have a schedule that we know we can count on, when we're doing things that we feel we're competent at, right? And that's what we crave. Now, on the other side of that issue is the notion of change, right? And that change is omnipresent. Change is always happening. As we sit here this morning on this call, we're changing a bit, right? We're digesting food. We're getting a little bit older, albeit in short increments. But change, is happening, and so part of this challenge is this paradox, balancing this paradox of not getting stuck in these ruts and these routines, the sameness that makes us feel comfortable, and really put us into, places where we can advance the cause. So this notion of change really speaks to a variation in the common way that we do things, right? That we create this commonality of life, and even stop and think about vacations that you take, and a lot of times we just sort of repeat things that we're comfortable with. We don't want to go out of our comfort zone, right? So this notion of variation, of commonality, and moving from what is the status quo to something new, is really hard to balance. And it's really important that we acknowledge that up front, because there's a lot of different ways we sanitize change. And, these are just some terms we use in the sanitization process, right? We alter a bit, maybe we modify a little bit, maybe we redo what we used to do or what we're used to doing, refashion, remake, revamp, right? These are all variations of change that are containable for us. But if we really back up and we look at, what is our challenge? What is our call? Why do we exist as organizations, right? It's really to create a change in community so that the folks that we support, the men and women and children, families who are experiencing disability, can be in valued roles and in meaningful relationships in their community, right? Now, this notion of thinking about change and how we make change happen starts initially with thinking, well, we can make change happen if we pass laws, right? I mean, look at the vaccine issue right now. That, we're in the midst of a pandemic, and we know that the vaccines have effectiveness. We know that the vaccines are available, and folks can easily get them. And yet some people are still, against getting a vaccine. They see it as in some way an infringement on their freedom, right? Now, one of the ways that we're trying to deal with that is now through mandates, through actually legal action, where companies here in the United States are essentially saying that if people want to continue working for us at Southwest Airlines or wherever, they have to get the vaccine, right? So now laws don't always work, right? I mean, there's backlash to it, and you cannot legislate that change is going to actually happen, or you cannot legislate that change is going to be the way you want it to be, right? And this quote from Einstein is kind of a perfect summary of this point that I'm going for here, that laws alone cannot secure freedom of oppression. In order that every person present their view without penalty, there must be a spirit of tolerance in the entire population. And so as we think about the change that we want to see happen, we need to really begin to say, well, we're not going to be able to legislate inclusion. Try as we might, right? Passing the ADA in the United States of America, the Americans with Disabilities Act, was really seen as, wow, this is going to be it. We're really going to, by passing this law, we're really going to create, inclusion. And we haven't, right? That law was passed in the United States in 1990, and we still have abject differentiation between people. And sometimes, the more laws, really the less justice. So in terms of thinking about how do we make change happen, then some of the knee-jerk reaction is, well, let's just pass a law, or let's just create a regulation. and that law or regulation will assure that we'll have the change that we crave or that we want. And those are fallacies. That's not true. And we think, well, if we just have more money and we could then invest in change, right? If we just had more funding, we could really make inclusion happen in Ottawa and Toronto and Sault Ste. Marie or wherever. And yet that's not true either, right? In fact, poet laureate Bob Dylan said that money doesn't talk, it swears, right? Which is really a kind of a powerful metaphor in terms of thinking about, well, will money create the change that we want? And what we're beginning to discover is that's not true either. And let me just to this point, let me just kind of share a little, historical passage for me. When I entered the field as an advocate, it was in 1970, right? When I graduated from college and got started as an advocate. And back in 1970, we wanted to get people liberated. We wanted people with disabilities included in the community, out of institutions, taking their rightful place in our community. And that was our battle cry then. That's still our battle cry today. And in that period of time, from 1970 to 2021, when we look at financial investment in the United States of America or in the city of Pittsburgh or whatever area we're focusing in on, we'll see that there are thousands and thousands of dollars available today that were not available in 1970, right? And yet we still haven't really created the kind of outcomes that we want. We still have a community that's bifurcated. We still have people with disabilities who are relegated to special, separate programs run by agencies like ours, right? So how can we begin to get our hands around this notion of change a little bit more clearly? And this brings me to the construct of praxis. If you look at any of the literature on change, you'll see that this notion of praxis is always embedded in the exploration, right? And praxis is really a gestalt, right? It's the fusion of three key dimensions, right? The first is reflection, right? The reflection of the fact that people with disabilities, using that as just one example, are not included and not really a part of everyday life, right? And then that reflection takes us to a theoretical then review of why, like why, or why, what's in the way, what has happened in other movements, what kinds of things informationally would be critical to then making change happen. And then once that synthesis, that analysis is done, then action, right? Do something based on that, right? And then once you do something, then you reflect. Did it work? How much of it worked? What didn't work, right? And then you go back to theory and say, why didn't that work? And what might be another way of addressing this, right? So this circular sort of analysis, this praxis, if you will, is absolutely essential if we really want to see change happen. This notion of reflection, theory, and action is hard to stay with. And, I know that in Algoma, for example, in community living Algoma, when I first started to meet with John and Tanya and the good folks in Algoma, board members and folks being supported families, that was back in like 2013, 2014. And at that point, we really were frustrated, that we just didn't have the kind of outcomes, people getting jobs, houses, rides, friends, doing things typically in community, right? And so we reflected on that. We looked at some theory, the theory of social capital, the theory of community engagement, of community building, and then we tried to apply some of that, right? And realized that some of it worked, some of it didn't work, right? And so it really pushed us into further reflection. So part of that reflection is this educational series that we're doing today, right? Is begin to think a little bit more about what we can add into our action. What other theory can we take? We did, for example, a session on community mapping a couple months back, right? And this idea of analyzing our community a little differently than than we perhaps did back in 2014, right? Or thinking about social infrastructure, another theory, another community building theory, right? And really beginning to input that. And then now back to action, because part of our action in Algoma is an actual research project where we're really going to apply some new things, some different things than we've done traditionally, right? So again, knowing that maybe not all of that is going to work, and there's going to be some things that may work, some things that don't, that gets us back to reflection. So change is this constant process, and the process is really informed by three dimensions here, right? That is, what is the present state, and being honest about that appraisal. What is the present state? And then what is the desired state? What do we want to happen? And then what kinds of things do we need to do right now to make that happen? The transitional state. So these three sort of states, this is the work of Kurt Lewin, a change, theorist. But he said this kind of process doesn't really work unless you're honest about it, the present state, and really analyzing it. And when in Algoma, when we looked at what does the community think about us, right? How does the community see us? And the brutal, we always want the community. Well, community living in Algoma, they're great. They do wonderful things, good people. They care about folks. They're really helping out. And, that's what we want to hear. But when we hear people say, oh yeah, they take care of those people. No, they're Algoma's people. They're community living Algoma people. That alone, that's a brutal analysis of the present state, right? And it's not fun to hear that. We always want to think we're successful, but we've got to be honest when we assess the present state. I would recommend any of the organizations that are on the call today to really do that, to really just take the time to really assess, what does the community think about you and about the people you serve? What's their attitude and take on that, right? Now, obviously, the desired state is maybe the opposite of the present state, right? Not always, but it can be the opposite. The desired state is we want folks to just take their rightful place. We want them to be embedded in community. We want folks to be just naturally a part of things, right? So now that juxtaposition between the present state and the desired state creates a zone of tension, right? I always liken it to Jenny Craig ads, right? If you see the weight control group of Jenny Craig, right? And they always, in fact, their advertising approach is the juxtaposition of the person in their present state, overweight, and then the same person now, svelte and in Speedos, in a billboard ad. So you see this, you actually see the present state, desired state, side by side, right? And that creates tension, because when you look at that and you say, oh my God, that's me on the one side, I'm overweight and I need to do something about this. And then you look at the same ad and you see the person in Speedos and they're really looking great and they're smiling, and you're saying, oh my God, that could be me. And then you think of yourself in Speedos and you start to say, oh my God, I need help with this. And you call Jenny Craig, right? Now, this notion of this tension is really an important, it's an important piece of the puzzle, because tension always is the mother of change. Change doesn't happen unless tension is there. And tension only exists if you're honest about the present state. You got to be. And then that creates a sense of tension, right? Now, one other important aspect in thinking about change, theoretically thinking about it, is that there are two orders of change, right? The first order of change is change within the framework. Now, what this really brings up, this idea of framework, is really akin to understanding paradigms, right? The paradigm of disability support, right? What is the framework of the paradigm of disability support, right? And then first order change is tinkering within that framework. Let me give an example. One of the hallmarks of the current paradigm of disability is labels, right? That people that come into our programs are labeled. They have a diagnosis. There's been some term that has been given to define them. Down syndrome, intellectual disability, traumatic brain injury, cerebral palsy, you know the terms. They're all out there, right? And labels are a hallmark of that framework, right? They're deeply embedded in that paradigm. And here's an example. My cousin Carrie, you guys who know me oftentimes hear me talk about my cousin Carrie, because it really grounds me to think about my experiences with Carrie. Carrie and I grew up right next door to each other. We were lifelong, buddies, the same age. But Carrie had Down syndrome, and when I think about Carrie and I think about the labeling process that Carrie experienced, it goes all the way back to her birth. In fact, when Carrie was born, she was on her birth certificate. It actually said Mongoloid baby girl. Mongoloid. That was the label to define Carrie when she was born. Now, anyone on this call would agree that is just, that is hideous, that we would even have, tolerated that, right? And the first chance, once we awakened to the fact that it was a hideous term to describe somebody, we changed the label from mongoloid to retarded, right? That was the term then we used. And then we began to scratch our head and say, boy, that's not a very good term either. And so we then called Carrie Down syndrome, right? She had Down syndrome. And then we got hip, we got into the 90s and we really started to, think person-centered. And so now we call Carrie a person with Down syndrome. Isn't that special? Right? Now, no one on this call would disagree that changing from mongoloid to retarded to Down syndrome to person with Down syndrome is not change, and it's not better change, right? And it's true, it is better change, but it's all change within the same framework, the framework of labels, the framework of identifying somebody as different from everybody else, right? And consequently, this idea of first order change, sometimes we can get stuck just tinkering, I don't know, just changing the screws in the framework, right? And think that we've made, major change, that we've really come a long way, baby, right? When in fact, all we've done is just, move this over to here and move this over to there within the framework of devaluation, because labels devalue people. Right? Now, second order change is creating a new framework, right? And that is really hard stuff, right? First order change is evolutionary. Second order change is revolutionary, right? And that word scares people, revolutionary. And the reaction to it is really, really, powerful. Now, this idea of change, I'm going to talk a little bit more about evolution, revolution in just a minute, but the flow of change, if you look at change, the process personally, that most of the time change doesn't really happen until somebody personalizes it, until the person really, stop and think about how many of us on this call, became advocates for disability rights after a personal experience in our family with our mother, our dad, our cousin. That's my route, right? My mom or my cousin Carrie with Down syndrome, then later in my voyage, my dad with Parkinson's, right? And so to me, disability advocacy is personal, right? But most change really doesn't happen until there's some personalization in this effort, right? That they've got to really personally understand it. I remember my mom was a smoker, and when we kids got old enough to be, introduced to the fact that smoking was bad, we started to badger our mom to stop smoking. Mom, this is not good for you. It's not, so the primary system around mom started to want to see her change, right? And then the secondary system, really all this effort to try to stop smoking and public awareness about it, all that stuff didn't amount to a hill of beans in my mother's behavior until she was diagnosed with cancerous polyps, right? And then it was personal, right? And then she really changed the paradigm, if you will, changed the framework. So the notion about change is from a sense of really personalization. Now, when we get into a little bit of some of the strategies here, I'm going to get back to this idea of personalization, because I think in terms of impacting culture and community, there's maybe a window there that we can think about. So change always starts with vision, and it's baited by tension, right? The vision for a better community, the vision for a better opportunity for folks that we support. But it's baited by tension, right? The tension that it doesn't exist right now. And tension, if tension doesn't exist, change doesn't happen. Change won't happen. If you're just satisfied with all the wonderful things that your agency is doing, and you're saying, oh yeah, we're great, we have this great program and we're doing this really wonderful thing, and then why would you change, right? There's no reason to change. But if you back away and really say, our community is really not inclusive, and that folks who experience disabilities really don't have the same opportunity and possibility that other people have, then you're probably not going to change anything. You're just going to continue to do things the way you always did do them. Okay? Now, embedded in any discussion about change is the notion of power, right? Because oftentimes change, there is a power issue somewhere in the change process, right? And when you think about change, in some ways, some people, don't want to lose their power. I'm always struck by a little poster that I saw, and I think it's actually even gone around on the internet, showing this older guy, and he's sitting at a table with two other guys, and the older guy has a plate of a lot of cookies, and across from him is a guy who appears to be like an immigrant, right? He looks a little bit different. And the third guy at the table, he has two cookies on his plate. And the guy who has a pile of cookies, he's looking at the guy who has two cookies and says, "That fellow wants to take your cookie," right? Pointing to the immigrant who has a plate that's empty, no cookies at all on it. And that notion of literally putting fear into somebody that there's going to be something that they're going to lose. And oftentimes in power analysis, there's a winner and a loser. There's someone who wins the game. There's somebody who loses the game. And the person who wins the game has more power, right? More influence. Now, this notion about power is oftentimes in some ways embedded culturally in in gender issues, right? Because we know that men still hold power from a gender perspective, right? And this quote from John Steinbeck is absolutely accurate, right? It's the nature of man as he grows older to protest against change, particularly change for the better. And the notion that usually older men who have more power in a culture, in a community, protest against change. They don't want change to happen. And now this notion gets me to share a little bit of Saul Alinsky and some of his theories. And Saul Alinsky was a change agent. That's sort of how he billed himself in Chicago, representing poor people in Chicago, folks that really didn't have much power or economy. And Alinsky really saw this power analysis as a triangle, much like this image that we have, right? Where at the top of the triangle are the haves. This is the guy with a lot of cookies, right? And then at the very bottom of the triangle, the biggest volume of the triangle, are the have-nots, the guy with no cookies, right? And then in the middle are what Alinsky called the have a little, want mores, right? Have a little, want mores, right? Now, this power analysis, Alinsky argued, is sort of typically the way things are. The haves really don't want to give up power. The have-nots oftentimes maybe don't even realize that they don't have the power or any options for power. And the have a little, want mores, they're kind of in the middle, and they're struggling to get a little bit more themselves. Now, when you think about this from a disability analysis, right, the have a little, want mores, in many regards, become us, those of us on this call. We have a little bit, we've got a little bit of power, maybe a little bit of, clout, not a lot, but maybe a little bit. And we represent people who really are forgotten or maybe invisible or really not viable in our communities. And so some of our role is representing reality, the reality of the have-nots to the haves, right? And in somehow, some way, trying to petition the haves. I mean, when we do fundraisers, this is exactly what we do, right? We invite in, people who have money, and we appeal to them to share some of their money with folks who don't have access to money, right? So this analysis of Alinsky is really, to help us understand the notion of power, especially when it comes to change. Now, Alinsky said, in his big book, by the way, it was out in the early 60s. I mean, that's how far back this was. Alinsky practiced in the 40s and 50s and in Chicago, and his book was published. It was called Rules for Radicals, and it was published, I think, in 1962. But Alinsky said, in terms of change, there's two routes, right? And this gets us to the first order, second order kind of discussion that I just shared a minute ago, where we have evolution, right? And evolution is working through the system for change, right? Really petitioning the system and trying to keep the existing paradigm and try to get some clout through the existing paradigm, right? Revolution, on the other hand, is working outside the system for change, right? And so
we'll just give Al a second to, it looks like he's frozen.
Corey, I wasn't sure if it was me that froze.
Yeah, no, it looks like he's frozen. We'll have to give him a second to see if he can regain his internet. Oh, he signed right off, so.
Okay. Maybe just thinking. He paused like that too, yeah.
Well, I was like, oh, did he ask a question and I missed it and he was waiting for answers?
Okay. I'm just going to message him. I'm just going to call him.
The joys of virtual. Sorry about this, folks.
I know. So I'm just on with Al. He's having a bit of internet issues. So he's, oh, there he is. Yeah, it looks like you're connected again. Okay, bye.
You just need to unmute, Al, and turn your camera on.
Okay.
Oh man, my apologies, folks, on this the internet thing. Let me get back to the screen. Let me see if I can get right back to the.
You were talking about how you were paused to think.
Okay, good.
Because you froze like this, Al, with your finger like this. So it looked like you were thinking.
I was thinking that happens a lot these days. I think we were on this evolution revolution point that we froze. And apologies, and glad. Let me just share that each of these have pros and cons to them, and that when we think about Alinsky's approach to change, I think what we can do is really begin to say, how do we tinker in both sides of this equation, right? How do we make both sides happen? For example, we know that people don't resist change as much as they resist being changed. And so when we think about, both strategies that are evolutionary or revolutionary, we need to think about who's going to resist this or who's going to push back, and why might they do that, right? And research shows that there are barriers to change. There are things that get in the way of change unfolding. And in fact, let me show this sort of this laundry list of resistance to change that's very, very classic, right? We're trying to promote a change agenda in our community so that folks that we support who have disabilities become included and incorporated in everyday life. And the people who work against some of that or struggle to be a part of that, there may be some of these reasons why they're resistant. Right? The fear might be the unknown. For example, families may say to you, you want their son and daughter to really be included in community, and that family's saying, wait a second, I don't want my son or daughter to get taken advantage of, or I don't want him to be, I don't want him to get hurt. They're vulnerable. And how would you do this in a way that they could be safe? I'm used to the group home. That really is something. I'm used to the day program. They come, they're safe there. Now you're talking to me about them being included in everyday life in the community, and that I just can't see it, right? Fear of the unknown, lack of good information about, how we can, in fact, get people included. People start feeling they're losing security. Staff members might feel, wow, you mean you want me to support the person, when they go to this or that? I mean, I don't know about that. Or people feeling they're losing power, right? Or it just may be bad timing. These are all classic reasons why some people resist. Maybe your staff, maybe the community members, maybe family members, maybe even people you serve might resist based on some of these kinds of things. And so resistance to change is always been out there. And even in our agencies and programs, when a new idea gets initiated, here are some statements that are classic that can stunt a good idea, a new idea, right? Where people say, "Oh, that'll never work here," or "That's not what my experience shows," or "Hey, we're overthinking this." These guys, they're out there, they're doing that, or "That's not the way we've always done it." All these statements can stop a new idea in its tracks, right? and these can kind of push us back to the safety zone of the things we know, rather than trying something that we've never done before or that might be different. And this really gets to, again, people that are stuck in their mindset, whatever their mindset might be. And it might be a pity mindset. It might be a vulnerability mindset. These folks are vulnerable, or they're not going to really be able to be successful. These things can run deep, right? So a lot of change effort really is trying to get people to rethink, right? Not necessarily to say, okay, you don't have to accept this lock, stock, and barrel, but let's just rethink some of what we believe or why we believe what we believe, right? And so this idea of rethinking, there's been a lot of research done on this rethinking. In fact, I was just looking over at my bookcase to see if I could find Adam Grant's new book. Oh, here it is. Let me show this to you. Adam Grant, this is his newest book. It's called Think Again, right? And it's really an excellent sort of expose on rethinking something based on new evidence, or based on perhaps something different that comes up in the dialogue. And Grant presents a lot of ideas about how we can try to rethink something, right? Now, there's also some things that need to be said about the change agent, right? The person who is attempting to make change happen in your agency or in your community, right? Now, Saul Alinsky identified these things. The stuff that you see right now on the screen, these are 9 variables that Alinsky said were really important for a change agent to be able to incorporate. And some of them are very, they're self-evident or self-descriptive, right? Some of them are a little bit deeper. For example, this idea of political schizoid. Alinsky said that sometimes the have a little want mores who are petitioning the haves on behalf of the have-nots will sometimes discover, when they get into the world of the haves, that it's comfortable there. It's really nice there. And they sell out, right? They sell out because getting into this nicer world, really basically buys them out, so to speak. So these notions, irreverence is really challenging authority, right? Imagination, kind of thinking about what might we do differently, or how can we imagine a world where some of the men and women that you support are just naturally there? Can we imagine that outside of our agency, right? Sensitivity. What might it be like? I don't know, to be strapped in a van sideways in a wheelchair and driven down some bumpy road, being delivered to some program. What might that feel like, right? And being sensitive to the world that the world that sometimes the men and women and children with disabilities that we support live every day in, right? And so with Linsky's ideas in mind, I wanted to present to you a process to think about in your own change effort, whether it's your own personal change that you're trying to address, or whether it's your organization that's really trying to do something new, right? The first is kind of an overview, And this comes from the work of John Kotter, Kotter. Kotter is really a change specialist. He's on faculty at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, right? And he wrote a book called Leading Change, where I pulled these ideas from. And Kotter says that, the very first aspect of a change effort is really the passion of establishing urgency, that we can't wait. We've been waiting for a lot of years here. We've been doing the same old for many, many years. And we need to establish a sense of urgency that it's got to happen now. We've got to do something different now. And then creating a guiding coalition that really want to see something different happen. And then developing a vision and strategy around that, communicating the vision, taking some of those first steps in the transitional state to bring some actions together, generating some wins, consolidating those wins into the culture, really making them a part of the culture. And this really leads me to my process. This was a process that I sort of wrote about in a book called Cultural Shifting. The book came out in 2002. And I really focused in on these things. And that is that change is really a process that includes a lot of pieces. And I made each of the pieces P words to make them more memorable, if you will. So passion, right? Passion. This is really about somebody's life, right? About somebody's being, denied, the part of what we all take for granted, right? It's the reason why many of us do this work is because we take it personally, right? It affects us personally. So passion. And then the passion alone doesn't make change. You can be passionate about something and nothing will happen because you have to have a position. What do you stand for? What do you want? What do we believe in, right? What is our position, right? But then position alone does like having a nice mission statement. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen, right? You've got to mobilize people, right? You've got to think about who's with you. You got to think about who might be against this and why would they be against it, right? And then have a plan, craft a plan. How do we invite those who are supportive of this? How do we help those who might be against it rethink this? Right? And then being present with our plan. Presence is absolutely critical. We can't make change happen by just hoping that it happens. And then understanding politics, right? That gets back to power and who's going to win in this deal. And the kind of the understanding of the political notion. And then perseverance, right? That this is a long haul, and it's not going to happen overnight, right? And we got to be able to stay the course. And then when we do have a victory, that we party, that we celebrate that victory, and we try to make sure that that victory gets incorporated into the culture, right? So now, with those things in mind, we need to treat people as if they were what they ought to be, and we help them become what they're capable of being, right? And it really starts with our own perspective, our own sort of, piece of what this is all about, right? And so with those things in mind, let me just kind of summarize, and then we'll open it up to questions. If you have questions or comments or experiences that you want to share related to the change process, stick that in the chat room. And then when we get to the final piece and we segue into our question and answer period, Corey can take a look at some of those questions and we can embrace them. This is a quote from an author by the name of Herman Rauscher. It comes from a book called Summer of 42, and it was a book that was about a kind of a boy becoming a man, like a coming of age kind of a story. And I love the quote because I think it really is reflective of life and the process of life, right? As Rauscher says, life is made up of small comings and goings. And for everything a person takes with them, there's something they must leave behind. Right? And this is really, I think, true as we move through our own change process as our organizations. What are we going to leave behind, right? As we begin to take something new forward, right? And both personally and organizationally. William Jennings Bryan said that destiny is not a matter of chance, it's a matter of choice, right? Destiny is really about the choices that we make, right? And it's not like a manifest kind of a destiny. Like it wasn't that what we're doing now was somehow, some way, what was intended to be, right? It was the choices we made based on the information, based on the theories we had, based on best thinking at the time. And we're now at a different place. We're evolving. We're learning more. We're growing. All right. And so the things that we've done have to give way to new things that we can do in creating a community where everybody belongs. In the long run, the race belongs not merely to the swift, but to the far-seeing, to those who anticipate a change. Right? And really, the future is ours to create if we have the courage, to do that. If we really are able to take some of these notions of change, some of this idea of praxis, some of the reflections and looking theoretically at, and maybe being irreverent. Why do we do it this way? Why do we have to have this? Why can't people be a natural part? Why can't people build meaningful relationships outside of a program or outside of an agency? Why? Why not? Right? That notion of being curious about, remember the quote, right? Some people see things as they are and say, why? I see things that never were and say, why not? Right? That notion of what can be. And so as we conclude this sort of reflection on change, I wanted to, as Tanya said I wanted to put up some contact information because we may not get to all the questions that you might have, or you may be reflecting more on this and then have a question later. And please know that I'm always happy to engage with any of you via a phone call, via email, and have an opportunity to kick something around with you. But the notion of change is not easy, and I don't want to be flip in this presentation to suggest that, well, okay, just do X, Y, and Z, and wow, all these new things are going to happen. This is not easy stuff. Just think of how hard change is for you personally, right? And it's hard to change. I mean, it's almost impossible to change somebody else because it's so hard to even change ourselves, right? So the notion is, how do we invite others to co-create with us something that's better than what we have right now? And how might that invitation, allow us to welcome, other thinkers, even if they don't think exactly the way we think, into the dialogue, because there's lots of different ways, to get to our goal. Right? So I'm going to stop sharing right now. I'm going to go back to asking both Corey and Tanya if there's any questions folks have. You can pose those questions through the chat room, or if you raise your hand if you just want to pose your question directly. I want to thank you for persevering. Apologize for that little technical glitch we had. Thank you for the earlier time adjustment, and let's kind of open it up to some dialogue. Corey, what do we have?
So nothing yet. Just give it a second though. I'm sure people are typing away. You're welcome to put your hand up too, folks.
Weller should have a question. I know he does.
Absolutely. Come on, Keenan.
I was trying not to be first. I was just reflecting because very early in your comments, you were talking about, how laws don't always get us there.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking a lot about that lately because people are really tired because, in Ontario back in 2009, after a very long fight for some people, more than, decades, they finally closed the three big institutions. All parties got up, the premier at the time was Liberal, but it didn't matter. Like all the parties endorsed the statement, they apologized. There was a class action lawsuit, it was settled. And a lot of people, okay, finally, it's over. We don't belong in institutions. Let's get to work on supporting people to live in community and have homes of their own. And now in 2021, we find ourselves with announcements of resurgence of congregated housing, because it can be a politically convenient way to solve the pressures of waiting lists. And this is happening simultaneous to, we just saw in long-term care, the suffering of people with COVID, many of it, privatized institutions. And of course, how do you make profit off humans? Well, you spend less money on soap, less on staff. There's no other way to do it. And so now this is happening and people are like, oh my gosh, it's all over again. Like we did all this and nothing changed. And I think it's just, supporting each other. It's not quite true. I just saw Steven Pinker on TV recently. He's reminding us there is progress, but this is the natural slide back. It's sometimes hard to keep that in mind. It just gets really tiring. I'm speaking for myself as much as anybody. Like I can't believe, we just had recently a resolution at Community Living Ontario to say people belong in homes of their own. And some people were like, well, I'm not sure that language is okay. I'm like, what? But if you could maybe just comment further on what to say to ourselves and what conversations to have organization when we feel like there's fights that are already won, and then it's like, oh no, it's not. Here it is again.
Right. Yeah, Keenan, that frustration is really omnipresent, and it's actually, in the example that you gave about reconvening congregate sort of living situations, takes me to a debate happening in the United States, and certainly happened during the Trump administration, where there was really efforts to roll back the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, saying that it was it was a hardship on job creators to have to make their places accessible and open to someone who might have a physical disability, and that what do we that how much of economic influence do these folks have anyway coming into our stores? They really don't have much money. They're not coming in. So why do I have to put a ramp up, and why do I have to my bathrooms accessible, and those kinds of things that we're all thought we thought it was settled law, right? And even now, looking again, using the United States as another example of a rollback with what's happening in Texas and Mississippi around reproductive rights of women, and that all of this we thought was settled. I mean, this seemingly had been finished, and now it's being even this election that we had in the United States. People are saying, well, it really wasn't a fair election, and Biden has almost been the president for a year, and yet people, so I think all of that sort of not retaliation, but what's the term I'm looking for? This
regression? I don't know.
Regression it certainly fits. Is creeping into, sort of the cultural reality, certainly in the United States, and I think, to a large extent in Canada and other countries as well. And so it seems like nothing really is settled, that there's always a revisionist kind of a thing that can unfold. And families I think can get caught up in this. And especially when a family, thinks about their son and daughter and all the things that we've promised families we could do, many of them have not come into fruition. And so the families are saying, well, they really don't know what the hell to do. Just keep my son and daughter safe. Just make sure that they are not taken advantage of. And because I can't trust the culture generally. And that kind of stuff. I mean, you see this with, in the autism movement, where there's this effort to kind of just create a separate world for folks who are on the spectrum, and that notion that, of tribalism that I think comes into play, where these people are not part of our tribe, and they need to find their own tribe, and the tribe needs to. All of that stuff, I think, is unloosened in our culture today, and in our community today, and so when you talk about praxis, I was talking about praxis, right? This reflection, and action, or theoretical analysis, and then action. It depends on what theory you look at. There's this revisionist sort of mentality. In the United States, for example, critical race theory, which is really on the hot seat in school districts around the United States, where there's this notion that somehow, some way, that the horrors of racism in the United States, and the analysis of that, is, well, no, that stuff, that's not really the way it happened, and this revisionist mentality that's out there. So how do you, if you don't agree on theory, or if you don't agree on the the premise, then how do you get action, right? The premise that we've had this entire session about is that people who experience disabilities can be involved and meaningfully engaged in our communities, right? So that's the premise. Now, some people may argue against that premise. Say, wait a second, no. I don't think that's an accurate premise. I think that people who have some vulnerability caused by a disability, they may be taken advantage of, and they may not be meaningfully, incorporated. It's just they may become, they may become the victim of an oppressor, and so if that premise that we're holding in dear, that's sacrosanct to us, right? If that now is being questioned, then how do you get to an action that everybody can agree on, right? And an action that we all can work towards. So, there's an anti-intellect. Look at the whole pandemic. Geez, that's a perfect prism in which to examine this notion of what is at the core here. So either you follow science, or you have something made up that people buy and incorporate. So we're in times that are really trying. And I think that the point you made, Keenan, in your question and in your analysis is, here we made the premise was institutions are not good places for people to be. And now people are arguing, well, maybe I don't know, maybe if you just put a little chandelier in there, maybe people will like it, and make sure people get 3 square meals a day, and it may not be that bad, right? So what do we believe in, is even at the core of this discussion today. Other thoughts that folks have on this?
Yeah, Al, there's quite a few actually popping up in the comments here. So I'll start. So ideas on giving a compelling vision, especially to community stakeholders.
Yeah. And the key word there is compelling. And this gets me back to the point I was trying to make in the content, was that the more personal this can be. You hear all these confessions about the vaccine from people laying on a bed in a hospital that have COVID and they can't breathe. And they're saying, they're taking their mask off. They're, get the vaccine. I should have gotten the vaccine. And that sort of notion of personalizing something really does get people to think about it, rather than be an abstract theory that some egghead, do-gooder came up with. How can this really personally be understood? And I think that's really an important. It's not a fear factor. I'm not suggesting that we somehow, some way get people in community to feel fearful that if I don't do this, it's going to really be. But for people to think, if that was your mom or dad, how would you want? Well, how would you want? Like my dad had Parkinson's, and and he really felt that people didn't want to be around him. Now, if that was your dad, if that was you, how would you? That kind of getting people to really understand, I think, what's at the core of this can be useful in the change process, to getting more consensus about a premise that we want action on. Great. Other things, Cor?
Yeah. So Kimberly commented and just said they just look nicer now, but they still exist. And then the next one from Christine: supporting the development of self-confidence for the folks we support is challenging. They look for staff approval, which continues the cycle of caring for and keeping safe. Any suggestions?
Yeah. Boy, isn't that a powerful statement? Because there's no question, we all want approval, right? We all want to be validated and to be celebrated. And so the notion that a person who's been devalued and oppressed wants to be liked is something any of us can personally relate to, right? And where the disconnect is in that statement is that people don't have to be validated by an agency program alone. That's what we're trying to do, is how do we change the community to validate everybody who comes forward that wants to be a part of that community, and therein, I think, lie the challenge. I've gotten more and more uncomfortable with the fact that most agencies on this call In fact, most agencies around the world that relate to people with disabilities do not have staff that have a community responsibility. Their staff are responsible to the client and the family. And I really think that we ought to actually be investing in community, in changing community, softening community. And we ought to have a team of staff that actually just do that they don't necessarily, a macro staff, if you will, who do not necessarily relate to the people we serve. I think, I just did a presentation in Australia over Zoom, and it was sponsored by, in Australia, they passed a couple of years ago a bill called the National Disability Insurance Scheme. That was the title of it, the NDIS, the National Disability Insurance Scheme. And what they really unloaded a lot of money and made it available to support people with disabilities, right? And so I was invited to, they're still talking about why people with disabilities are not included in Australia, in spite of all the money that NDIS has brought to the fore, right? And one of the things that I looked when I was doing my research for my talk, what I discovered was that the majority of that money was specifically for individuals with disabilities, and maybe equipment and devices and things that they could use to engage in community. And that's all well and good. I'm fine with that. What I didn't see $1 invested in was changing community, shifting community. And I think we need a team of people that do just that. They just work community. And that we, get involved in what's happening in community, and we really try to impact the nature of our communities. I think we have to invest in that. I just think to just invest in, okay, well, let's have more staff to work with the folks that have disabilities and bring them out to community. That's not good enough. That hasn't done it. That's not changing the culture. What it is reinforcing, I think, the premise that the community has is that these people are better off in our programs. They're better off when they're CLA people, and they're better off when the CLA staff is with them, and we have to have some kind of an effort in thinking about how do we penetrate that mentality, that cultural mentality that's out there. And I just think we need a concerted effort within our agencies to work community. And I have more ideas on that are not germane right now to this conversation, but I think that we've always got to try another way, right? If what we've been doing, get more funding, get more regulations, safeguard regulations we have. I mean, all that stuff is well and good. Get dollars for personal things that people need to be more involved in community. I get all that. I'm with all that. But there's still a missing piece here. Because if any of those things were magic, we wouldn't need this conversation today, right? If any of those things would work, we wouldn't need to be assembled to explore this. Other question, Corey?
Yep, so this next one, it's a little lengthy. So we have such a wait list and people don't have places to go. I was in a class and had a conversation how it costs millions of dollars to just build a house for 6 people. And you need zoning permission, which is limited to each neighborhood. And I was like, why is there 6 people even living together? And why is it costing millions of dollars? Why do we need to ask for permission from neighborhoods to build there? And the answers I received made me so sad. How neighborhoods only want so many of these homes. And this was down in the Toronto area. I was so confused. And I thought, in this day and age, people can choose where and who they live with, but I was so very wrong. I do understand the wait list and not having spaces, but to go back to how it was seems like history repeating itself and a cautionary tale. It's not talked about unless among the groups that are involved. I'm hoping I misunderstood and misheard the information, but asked the question and was sad and confused by the answers. And Keenan did jump in on this, and Keenan had a bit of a response to it, and then Al will get you to go. So Monique, part of the answer is that people who live in a house or apartment like everyone else don't need different building codes or zonings or permission or anything else. It costs so much more because it's a mini institution and therefore a regulatory environment, which costs a lot more, which is also why there's objections, limits, etc.
Yeah, I think Keenan's right on. Again, it's just trans-institutionalization that is unfolded through most of the things that we've been doing, and we're treated that way. We're treated just like, you know, because we are in some ways institutionalized. We've institutionalized the disability reality, and so, you know, it's easy to see how community and community leaders just immediately defer and just say, okay, well, you know, they're a specialized service in our communities. They're not part of our community. They're just sort of adjunct to our community. And they, being group homes or supported apartment programs or whatever other methodologies we've used to try to get people included. So I think that clearly, and this gets back to the statement I just made a minute ago, that we don't invest much in really trying to work community. Every one of us on this call have community in our names or in our mission statement somewhere. We talk, you know, we're changing community, we're building community, we're doing this, we're doing that. And yet, you know, we don't have anyone on our staff or any presence in trying to embed into the community and to try to tinker and flip some switches there. So, you know, the person who wrote the note was saddened by the answers that she got in talking with officials in Toronto or whatever community she was raising these questions in. You know, is really just identifying the present state. That is the present state that we find ourselves in. And we just need some ideas. And I know, for example, you know, Keenan, you guys have put together, you know, that think tank gathering that you do annually. And that, you know, that's great to bring in good minds and really rethink this. But maybe a question like this is really, you know, a question that's much more macro in nature, you know, becomes, you know, the core of exploration in, you know, a think tank agenda. Because you got some great minds and some really forward thinking, you know, influences all through Canada and certainly in Ontario. You got some great thinkers, and really coming together to address just this issue would be, I think really useful in advancing the agenda.
For sure.
Other questions might have come up.
Yeah, so no comments at this time, but Tanya does have her hand up.
Okay. Whose hands up?
Myself. So one is, I have two parts that are a bit different. So one is just a comment, because you were referring to what we've done at Community Living Algoma around what does community think of us? And when we were having that conversation, it's so powerful because that's why we're doing that work, right? We're doing the community engagement project because we want it to be a welcoming, inclusive community for all people, not just people with disabilities.
Right.
Because one of the things we keep hearing about is, God bless you, or you're so, I can't believe you do this. And, they really do say that they are CLA people.
Yes.
So we really haven't changed much. And I fear that COVID and all the restrictions is only going to make us go backwards in time, right? So for myself, it's really being focused and thinking on that and looking forward to the work that we need to do. So I just wanted to make that one comment. And the other piece is, I'm so thankful that you've done this presentation, because as you know, as organizational leaders, as a community living Algoma, we continue to move the organization forward, to push change and move us forward to evolve and change, because we need to, because we can do better for people. And we keep talking about that. And you shared lots of great ideas and things to think about. But particularly, I really appreciated was when you talked about John Carter's creating change. So establish the urgency, creating guiding coalition, develop vision strategy, things like that. I think those are really great things to make sure that we communicate that to the organization, because through the change process, you said exactly, it's not easy, it's very difficult, and we have a lot of resistance for change. But we're changing to enhance the lives and to enhance the quality of life for people we support, and we can do better. And so I really appreciate that you put this together for us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tanya. In fact, the whole self-analysis of what do people think of us is really, I think, a good process that we all should go through. How are we perceived? And one of the things Tanya just said from the project that we're doing in Algoma is really this broadening, really having us, really looking at how we're perceived, and then how do we reposition ourselves to really be broader than just disability, but really to be about a quality community, right? And one of the strategies that in our engagement project that we're doing to try to manifest that a bit more is establishing a community advisory council, right? And so we've been doing a lot of brainstorming, Tanya, John, Corey, Andrew, a lot of the Stacy, the leaders at Algoma. We've been doing a lot of brainstorming on who might we invite into a conversation in our community about not disability, but about inclusivity, right? For anyone who feels marginalized or set aside. The UK is actually doing some things like this already, and has some interesting results, because when they did a loneliness study in the UK in 2018. They commissioned a group to look at generic loneliness in the UK, not just disability issues, because people could be lonely for lots of reasons, right? And when they began to drill down a bit on this, they discovered that loneliness was so pervasive in the UK, and there were lots of different people, who felt lonely, and there might be some reasons tied to why they felt lonely, but it's not just disability, right? And so in the UK, what they're really trying to assemble is how do we combat loneliness, right? And in some ways, one of the things we want to do in Algoma and Sault Ste. Marie, and with the neighboring communities, Hornpain and Elliott Lake, and some of the other community groups that we have some connection with, is to really think about this as a community agenda rather than a disability agenda, and to really begin to identify and bring together people who can help think this through, from various domains in our community. And and so we're just in the early stages of assembling our community advisory council their job is going to be to help us with our engagement project, but we see this bigger outcome for the region. And we think this advisory council might be able to actually get legs of its own. And CLA will sort of, initially support it, but then it could become a community-wide resource in Algoma. So again, tinkering in these areas becomes, I think, new ground for us. It's not the stuff that we have traditionally done, because we're trying to think of this out of a community framework, right? Out of a community building theoretical framework. So the idea of community mapping, the idea of social infrastructure of community, those are community tools. They're not disability tools, right? And so we want to see if we can harness some of this and really begin to try another way. It may work, may not work. We don't know for sure, but we really feel confident that as we invite more people into a conversation about inclusivity, that just like in UK, they invited people into a conversation on loneliness, just generic loneliness, it really began to cut through all these tribes and all these, worlds that have thought about loneliness within their tribe, but now to think about it holistically, those become sort of things we can begin to think about. Anything else, Tanya, Corey, anything else that we, or anybody else that's on the call? Thank you for hanging with us and being a little earlier today with our start. I think this is a great conversation to have. It's not sometimes a pleasant conversation. It can be painful, but it's important that we have these kinds of discussions to talk about. How does the culture change?
Right. 3 more comments in the chat here, Al. So first one is, I heard all the statements that stump by very caring people, and probably some have said them myself. How do you work past such a statement that shuts down communication?
Yeah, I mean, the notion of shutting down communication, it's interesting that the person who raised that question would talk about that, because that's the premise of this book, is that often, when you get into into a conversation, it becomes polarized and then it shuts down, right? And folks, I mean, politically, we see this, gender issues, we see this happening. And we've got to really think about how and work at how do we keep the conversation going, even if it's abrasive to us, or even if it's some people will say, well, I don't want to have a conversation with somebody who doesn't think like I think, or they're using false premises in their thought process. Consequently, I don't want to even engage with them. But if you don't engage, then clearly, we're going to be polarized, and clearly there's going to be no winner in the deal. So the notion of keeping the conversation going, even in spite of how uncomfortable it makes us, is just an important premise. It's hard to do, and I wish I had the magic answer to that. Grant looks at that a little bit in terms of his book Think Again, because he's really trying to appeal to people to do this individually, that when you bump into a premise that you don't agree with, your knee-jerk reaction is just to dismiss it, right? And so what he's suggesting is, no, look at it a little, even if you don't agree, why don't you agree with it? And what are some of the key points? And are there any potential points of intersection for conversation that might be there? Maybe not, but at least to examine it. Other thoughts, Cor?
Yeah, there's two more comments, Al, and I don't think either are looking for a response. They just want to make a comment. So Wendy says, I've watched people I support engage with neighbors more than people on my own street. Check on people during fire alarms, ask neighbors if they're okay, and many more stories. I think when we let community partners and community members know the little things have a huge impact on the community overall, this can also cause a need or want to do more effect. I just had a conversation with a man who had no idea how the little things he's doing is bringing neighbors together and who never knew each other, and look forward to seeing his morning jokes with in his window. Small things could lead to big impacts.
Great, amen.
Yeah.
Good points.
Yeah, and then Keenan, not expecting an answer to this, just making a note to all regarding Al's last comment about working together on the macro question of establishing the fundamental principle that people with intellectual disabilities have the right to an included life and the supports they need to have. I think we need to look to Community Living Ontario and perhaps more so Inclusion Canada, formerly Canadian Association for Community Living, because most of us have a level of engagement with CLO already. To engage with us differently. Inclusion Canada shares the same beliefs, but there's really very little connection between their policy work and the work that we do on the front lines that bring those policies to life. They celebrate policy wins. We celebrate positive change in the lives of individuals, but we aren't connecting the two very effectively, as it is the rest of the public that needs convincing. We have not been invited to a single Inclusion Canada conversation since probably 2009. Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, I think the comment speaks for itself, that, aligning supposed allies becomes, I guess the first order of business. And we've been talking a lot today about, well, how do we invite in other people who are not from our tribe or who have not, been a part of, quote, the disability rights movement. And there's formidable challenges to that. But I think the point that Keenan was making is that, even in our own tent, in our own tribe, there's need for conversation and to listen to each other and to really try to find some consistency. So I just say amen to that, because I think that has happened not just with Inclusion Canada and Community Living Ontario. It really it happens in so many other areas and domains. I just yesterday did a lecture on inclusive leadership at the university in the School of Public Health. And we had a large group gathered, and the point that I was really trying to make about inclusive leadership was the notion that a leader really examines, the potential paradigm shift needs. Like we discussed today, we talked about first order change and second order change, right? And the inclusive leader really is always looking at, what are the other paradigms that might be a part of it. And one of our conversations yesterday that really resonated with everybody was patient care, right? So this was the healthcare group, right? And what we were looking at is what is the paradigm of healthcare around patient, patient empowerment, right? And one little example would be, in our conversation yesterday, was visiting hours at healthcare institutions, right? And visiting hours have traditionally been designed by the institution for the institution to control what goes on, right? So you control when the visitor comes and also when you have the visitor leave. Yet the healthcare paradigm is beginning to tinker with patient-centered care, right? Rather than institutional-centered care. And patient-centered care on the idea of visitation says visitors should come they should be able to come anytime. They should be able to stay all night if they want to stay. They should be able to sleep right in the room with the person if they want, right? So that's the converging sort of debate that's happening in just around that one little issue in healthcare. Is healthcare about the patient or is it about the institution? And if you say that healthcare is about the patient, then consistency is necessary in empowering patients and looking at how wellness happens, inside and outside of the institution. And so, I think Keenan's point is that within our own little tent, we need to have conversations about premises, about what we believe, about what is really important, and why we believe it. And we need, to connect some dots within our own family before we can really effectively communicate with other tribes and with other realities of community.
So we're rounding close to 11. I'm just going to read these last two comments, and then I think Sherry might want to say something.
Sure.
So reminds me of the CLO 2019 keynote. Very cool organization in Perth, Australia, and Rebecca included a link in the chat. And then Kimberly says, great way to start the week. Thanks, Al and CLA. Sherry, I noticed that you unmuted. Did you want to say something? Maybe not. Jumping the gun. You go ahead, Al. Oh, there is a new message. No, she says no. My apologies, Sherry.
Not a problem. Great. Well, I just want to conclude by, again, wishing everyone a belated happy Thanksgiving and thanking the folks here for some thinking. I don't think that we gave any magic wands today, but hopefully opened up some thinking about change and about what change means for us individually and what change means for us organizationally, and how we might proceed. Maybe some things that we might consider down the road, maybe things that we might consider tomorrow. I want to appreciate and thank Tanya, John Policicio, all the good folks at Community Living Algoma for hosting our conversation today, and for their courage to begin to examine outside of some of the kind of traditional things that we've done, ways that we can create a more inclusive community. So thank you, Tanya. Let me just pitch it to you for a final conclusion.
Yes, thank you, everyone. And our next session is Measuring Loneliness, and it's on Tuesday, November 9th at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, so 10 to 12. And then the last one is Measuring Social Capital, and that's session 11, and that's Tuesday, December 14th, 10 to 12 Eastern Standard Time. So I'll make sure I send out the Zoom link.
Yeah, thank you, Tanya. In fact, before you conclude, just on those two issues, you're going to be getting not only a Zoom link, but you're going to be getting some measures. And I'm going to ask that you actually take the UCLA loneliness scale prior to our conversation next month. You have a little bit of time to do that. It's 20 items. It won't take real long. And in fact, I think it'll really be interesting for you to sort of look at how social science is now trying to codify loneliness. And so we're going to look at the loneliness scale, on that Tuesday when we have our session. But prior to it, if you can actually take the scale that Tanya will send you, that'd be great. That'll give us a little bit of a leg up in our conversation next month. Okay.
And I'll send out things ahead of time. And if anyone needs the PowerPoint information from today, just send me an email. I can make sure you have a copy of that.
Great, great.
All right.
Looking forward to
Thank
seeing
you so much,
everybody
Al.
next month.
Thank you everyone for joining. Have a wonderful day. Thanks, Corey, for your help.
Take, guys. Thank you. Be
Bye.
well.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Have a great day.
Thanks.
I just moved everybody to the waiting room.
Okay. And you're able to get the copy of the comments.
Yeah, I'm gonna grab it right now. I'll just copy paste it into an email.
Okay. I totally thought it was my internet because I moved away from my desk to sit here at the table to see if it made a difference. I wonder if it's Zoom because I seem to have better luck with Zoom than I do Team.
Yeah, Teams I find is just not, I don't know what it is, but I think we have better luck with Zoom too. Like we stay connected better. It doesn't jump all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say it's been, I mean, I've had some Zoom issues for sure. But I don't know, maybe just it's Tuesday morning and I'm having some luck.
Who knows, right?
Yeah, maybe because I had to go home and get my cord.
True. Who knows? There,
Okay,
I
so-
grabbed everything. I'll send it over to you.
Okay, so who's covering for Jen? Is it Louise or Serge? Okay,
Louise
so
is
Serge.
covering for Jen and Serge will cover for me after today.
Okay, perfect. Because I was just I was texting you about Sarah because I have myself a little note here. There's an IPAC thing due today, and I wasn't sure if she was available and if she's completed or not. So
I don't know. I've emailed her because I was looking for an update on Lisa because I didn't hear from Sarah over the weekend. So I assumed that no decisions got made because they were looking at taking her off a BiPAP on Sunday.
yeah.
And Sarah never reached out to me. So I didn't want to reach out and say, Kate, and you know what I mean? Because if everything was going fine, I didn't want, to bother her. But I've reached out through email and I haven't heard back from her, and she's not on vacation. She was supposed to be off this weekend, according to her bounce back on her email, like her away message says she's back in office today. So, but I haven't heard from her.
Okay, I just wanted to check because I'm going to follow up with her to make sure that got submitted.
Right. Yep. So Serge is covering for me after today. Andrew's going for a COVID test. He's got a high fever and a pretty barky cough. So I know he's double vaccinated, but those were two of the big things that they say that is the barky cough and the high fever. So I told him to go for a COVID test. So he's off today. But Stacy and Maureen are both working, and then none of my managers are on vacation the rest of the week. So unless Andrew's sick, but I'll get Serge updated on that. Okay. Lucas is running me a report on the vaccine, like on the rapid tests.
Yeah.
So we can see that. Said he should have it done shortly before noon. And then I meet with Chris this afternoon to get the host family and those few people supported. There's going to be a couple people supported living in host families that aren't going to be able to tolerate. Yep. So we'll just document that. And then we'll roll that piece out. So that's good.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yeah. I don't see anything else pressing. Unfortunately, I'm not going to have time to rebook. I know we were supposed to meet at 9:15.
Yeah, but 9:15 is going to work normally, right?
Right. It's just Al bungled it today, right?
Yes. Okay. So we'll just keep it moving at the 9:15, and I was trying to put an arrow on the bottom. I'm not good with like putting in things because I tried to put an arrow on the bottom and I'm like, oh my God, because it has the dates. The only thing I wasn't sure about, Corey, is when do you want to start doing the employment review? Because I know that you have to, like, for the next 3 months, you have to focus on spending direct time with the staff, which I think is going to help with employment. Do you want that as a January start?
I guess January is going to be better. I would have liked to have started before, but I don't think I'm going to have, and I think if we're going to change that lead on that, I think it needs to be, the review needs to be after we start the lead also, right? So if we look at starting that lead into December, because November 30th is our date, right? And then if we look at then, so a January, mid-January kind of makes sense.
Yeah, and that's just starting the review, like a mid-January, but and I think that will help because yes, you're kind of going into the swing of summer, but I think that's how you're going to learn things too.
Agreed, 100%.
I just wanted to ask you that, and then I'll finalize the plan next. I forgot, like on the weekend, I'm like, oh my God, I forgot to ask you about employment. And then it's just getting, so for October 18th, I was going to email you guys that'll be the start of like your 3, 6, 9, 12 month plan. So getting that, we can talk about that next week too, to formalize that as well.
Oh, yeah, I think I know what you mean. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. I think I'm following you.
Yeah, the 3, 6, the accountability based management plan.
Yeah, which I haven't filled one of those out yet. So I'll get on that.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, we can review it on the Tuesday.
Okay.
You don't have to do it like while you're on holidays or anything like that. Like we can take a look and do it.
Right, because our 3 month is going to look very different than what we had anticipated it.
3 months, basically you're going to be working alongside your managers for the next 3 months. Yeah.
Fair. Yep. Yep.
But
And
there's things in there,
my
right?
calendar reflects that. Yep.
Yeah, there's things that align with our 3 priorities, right? The relationships, the health and safety stuff, like communication, yeah.
And compliance.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I hear you. I'm with you. Yep.
Okay, perfect.
Sorry, Tanya.
Yeah, that's all right. Thank you.
Okay, if I'll see you before the end of the day.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, me too. I'm here all day.
Okay.
I'm meeting with Tanya. Meeting with Tasha and Steve in about 20 minutes to talk about the EMAR stuff.
Nice.
Just so you know where we are on that. Tasha's taking the lead, and John's only when I asked him about that, because he was her manager at the time, his only request, so you're on the same loop, is that Matt be involved in whatever we decide, because that way Matt can make sure everything's, aligning with the direction he's going.
Right. And I did talk to Steve a little bit last week. I've talked to Matt about the dashboard and what I need. So they've both been hearing what I need to be able to see every day, right? And it's things like, documentation, but it's the around the administration piece. It's did someone get the wrong medication? Did someone get double dose? Did someone did not get a medication? Like those kinds of things. Like,
right.
It'd be good to see. And then time of day, and is it overtime, forced overtime, location?
That's right.
Second, third error, like that kind of thing on a dashboard, right? So I've talked to both of them about that. So okay.
Okay, I'm gonna go because Bernie's having a hard time. Bye.
Okay. Thanks for your help.
Okay, bye.
Bye.